In the spirit of capturing the human species' eternal struggle to overcome our Earth's great bodies of water, here are the oldest stories available of ancient explorers and their adventures at sea. At some point between 610 and 594 BC, with the support of Egyptian pharaoh Necho II, Phoenician mariners set out from the Red Sea and sailed down Africa's east coast. Whenever autumn came, they would row to shore and plant seeds in the ground wherever they were. Following the harvest, the journey continued. And in this way, after the better part of 3 years, they rounded the Strait of Gibraltar and arrived in Egypt. Herodotus writes, "There they said, what some may believe but I do not, that in sailing around Libya, Africa, they had the sun on their right hand." Ironically, the detail Herodotus almost haphazardly adds to justify his disbelief serves as evidence confirming the story. As the Phoenicians sailed west around the Cape of Good Hope, Africa's southernmost tip, the sun of the southern hemisphere would have risen and set on their right-hand side. How might a person of Mediterranean antiquity have known this astronomical occurrence to even be conceivable, unless somebody had seen it with their own eyes and lived to tell the tale? The Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias is the next person credited for reaching the end of Africa. He did so in 1488, over 2,000 years after the alleged Phoenician expedition. In the 5th century BC, Hanno the navigator sailed for 3 days along a stretch of West African coastline set ablaze. His spooked fleet eventually came to a safe bay called Horn of the South. In the recess of this bay, there was an island having a lake, in which there was another island. This smaller island, however, was full of what Hanno labeled savage men. There were women with them too, in even greater numbers. They had very hairy bodies, and interpreters called them gorilla. Hanno explains, "When we pursued them, we were unable to take any of the men, for they all escaped by climbing the steep places and defending themselves with stones. But we took 3 of the women, who bit and scratched their leaders and would not follow us. So Hanno killed and flayed them." For those unfamiliar with the practice of flaying, it is often associated with an action to strip or pull off the skin or hide from a victim's entire body. Hanno brought their skins back to Carthage, where according to Pliny the Elder, they remained on display in the Temple of Juno until the Roman destruction of the entire city in 146 BC. About the same time, Hanno the Navigator exited the Mediterranean Sea and turned south. Another Carthaginian's adventure carried him north along the Atlantic-facing west coast of Europe until the wind stopped blowing, at which point he and his men were forced to physically row through vast, uncharted waters littered with impassable pockets of seaweed. The open ocean would have been new to these sailors. The terrifying endlessness and non-existent winds were made worse when a dense fog came over the ship, making it difficult to see from one end to the other. Himilco also embroidered his expedition with tales of vicious sea monsters. The more impossible he made the trek seem, the greater the glory bestowed upon he, and the less motivated Carthage's Greek rivals would be to cut in on the treasures he discovered. After the Persian king Darius the Great conquered a portion of the Indus River in 515 BC, he needed a better understanding of the terrain ahead of him, and thus commissioned the Greek sailor Skylax of Carianda to explore the course of the Indus River and find out where it met the sea. The flotilla started out sailing down a river toward the east and the sunrise. There are legends the sailors witnessed giant gold-digging ants on their journey through the Indus Valley. Upon reaching the Indian Ocean, or at least whatever they perceived the large body of water to be, they turned right and ventured west. Who knows at what point they saw a recognizable geographic or cultural landmark, and how relieved that made them. 30 months were spent circumnavigating the waters surrounding the Arabian Peninsula, from the Persian Gulf to a northern part of the Red Sea. Around the same time, Alexander the Great was spreading Greek influence beyond the furthest eastern edges of the known world. Another man set sail on an adventure in the opposite direction, northwest. His first stop was a massive island just outside the Mediterranean Sea. He named it Britannia, perhaps after a term the native inhabitants used, Prytani, which is a Celtic word that most likely meant the painted people. Over centuries, the word evolved into Britain and adopted the adjective great. Pytheas became the first person to document English culture, describing cottages covered with dry vegetation, grain stored in subterranean caches, and the baking of that grain into bread. The indigenous people, he wrote, are of simple manners and content with plain fare. They were ruled by many kings and princes who lived in peace with each other. Pytheas traversed the British Isles by foot and boat for multiple years. Native Scottish people referred him to an otherworldly land called Thule. Regarding the Thule Pytheas saw with his own 2 eyes, it can be found a 6-day sail north of Britain, has 21 to 22 hour days, and during the summer solstice, the sun does not set there. Pytheas is credited for the first recording of the midnight sun, which occurs in the summer months in places north of the Arctic Circle. He is also credited with the first recording of the Northern Lights, a natural light display covering the entire Earth's sky. One can only imagine how Pytheas's attempt to describe the natural phenomenon was received by his intellectual peers. They must have figured somewhere along the way he embarked upon another kind of trip, one that brought him to what he saw next. Perhaps the most bizarre observation yet reported. Polybius recounts the alien world Pytheas described a day sail north of Thule. Those regions in which there was no longer any proper land nor sea nor air, but a sort of mixture of all three, of the consistency of a jellyfish, in which one can neither walk nor sail, holding everything together, so to speak. Take a look at this photo from the US Coast Guard. If you were on an ancient sailboat attempting to navigate these waters and asked to write down what you see, how might you describe the surrounding environment to people who know absolutely nothing about it? Given this assignment, I'd say a place where there is no land, no sea, no air, but a mixture of the three, impassable by foot or ship, isn't half bad. Then to so kindly relate the sight to something folks in the Mediterranean might be familiar with, such as a jellyfish is going the extra mile. How might you describe a jellyfish? A creature that's not totally solid, liquid, or air, yet in which all these things are together suspended, sounds decent to me. During Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty, around 116 BC, an Indian man washed ashore in the Arabian Gulf. Egypt's Coast Guard apprehended the man and brought him into custody. The soldiers reported that they had found him on a ship, alone, and half dead. They could not figure out who he was, where he came from, or the reason for his visit. He was placed in the hands of preceptors appointed to teach him the Greek language. After learning enough, the mysterious, though abundantly educated man explained that his voyage began along the coast of India. He set sail into the open ocean, but lost his course during a violent storm. The ordeal caused his entire crew to die of starvation, and considering the condition he was found in, almost took his life as well. One way or another, the man managed to arrange an audience with the Egyptian king, to whom he made a bold promise. If he could be afforded the opportunity to return to his native country, he would point out to those sent with him by the king the route by sea to India. The tremendous economic upside proved worth the risk. The king financed the man's voyage from Egypt to India, and among the crew sent with him the famous Greek explorer Eudoxus of Cyzicus. The fleet arrived in India bearing countless presents, and in exchange, the sailors brought back with them exotic fragrances and precious stones. One can presume the Indian captain chose to stay home upon arrival, as the story continues, but only through the vein of Eudoxus. After completing the first expedition, Eudoxus was once again sent to India by the Egyptian monarchy for commercial reasons. On his return voyage, he was blown off course and found himself in unknown lands on the east coast of Africa. While mingling with the native people there, he stumbled across a beautifully carved wooden horse head that once belonged to the prow of a Mediterranean vessel. The tribesmen confirmed the ship it came from wrecked on their shores long ago. Incensed at the prospect, Eudoxus suspected Africa was surrounded by water. He could sail a southwesterly course around the continent starting from the Strait of Gibraltar, venture east through the open ocean to India, and continue his monopoly on direct trade relations with civilizations there. Beating a course north, he completed his mission to Egypt, then went home, sold everything he had to his name, built the largest ship he could, as well as 2 supporting towboats, and sailed off into the Mediterranean sunset. Eudoxus stopped at ancient ports hugging the sea's coast, from Sicily, Italy, to Marseille, France, to Cadiz, Spain, collecting a vibrant cast of characters along the way. The melting pot crew included singing girls, doctors, and artists of all sorts. He promised them revolutionary adventures beyond the Pillars of Hercules, historic circumnavigation of the African continent, lands, beasts, and oceans never before seen by man, and most importantly, riches resulting from rare maritime trade with untapped Indian sources. All aboard, the Adventure Express was carried into the Atlantic Ocean by favorable westerly winds. But Eudoxus' star-studded crew quickly grew weary of the voyage's physical and mental demands. They forced him, against his will, to sail closer to land, which he really didn't want to do, because he feared the ebb and flow of the tides. Indeed, his greatest fear came true. The ship ran aground. Using the salvageable wood from his ships, Eudoxus built a new boat and sailed back toward the Mediterranean. Having regrouped once back in modern-day Spain and ditched unsavory crew members, Eudoxus constructed another large ship of 50 oars. He also gathered agricultural implements, seeds, and carpenters on board, then set out once more into the sunset. This time, should the circumnavigation be delayed, he was prepared to spend winter on an island he previously observed, plant seeds there, reap the harvest, and when favorable, continue the voyage. This is where Eudoxus sails off the edge of the historical record, never to be heard from again. Alrighty everybody, that's gonna do it for today's video on ancient explorers and their adventures at sea. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.